My name is Maria, and you're listening to the podcast where we deconstruct someone's PhD experience so that you can reconstruct your own. This is a journey with many challenges, but you might find yourself in a similar situation as one of the guests here. Enjoy listening. Okay. Welcome, Margriet.
Thank you.
Second try. Well, starting again from describing many facets of you, I was very inspired to talk to you where you shared how you did your PhD in particle physics. Then you turned to be a science journalist. Then you started writing your own columns, writing the books. You became a mother, you're a partner. There are so many things to tell.
Yeah.
Tell me, maybe for this instance, since it's a bit about the PhD and the academic life, let's start from there. How did you make a choice to do a PhD?
Yeah, I didn't really choose in the sense that I studied at the Free University of Amsterdam, and I had always been attracted by the more fundamental questions in physics as a high school student, as many high school students, I think. Where do we come from? How is the universe? Where does it all originate from? And then when I began to study, okay, your interests go in other directions. You discover quantum physics, which is really quantum mechanics, really interesting, and so on. So I ended up in theoretical solid state physics. But then a position fell free at NICEF, the Dutch Institute for Particle Physics, that allowed one to go to CERN and to work on an experiment where physicists studied the quark structure of nuclei. And then I was asked whether I was interested in that position, and then I thought, oh yeah, because it would allow me to go to Geneva and to be close to the mountains, which I love very much. And it touched upon my interest. The particle physics, I thought, yeah, that is a fundamental part of physics that I really felt attracted to. So yeah, I was lucky in a sense. I was the right person in the right position in the right time.
And how common was it at that time that you would go somewhere else to do a PhD? I can say nowadays, it's pretty common that people move abroad, but how was it?
In those days it was not so common. I think from my year I was about the only one to go abroad. It was a different time, because I went there in 1986, and by train. And I remember, because I had to move, so I packed all my things, and then I realized I couldn't lift my bag. So I had to phone someone, can you bring me to the station? But it was not so common, and it was really great. I really remember it was like a big adventure. I didn't have a license, and I lived in Saint-Denis, and so I had a racing bike, a pink racing bike, and I went on bike to CERN, which was really uncommon in those days, and there were no cycle paths, and it was quite dangerous, I think, in retrospect, that I was cycling there. But anyway, I got my license later. And we went skiing in the weekend, but it was also the whole atmosphere that was of excitement there, the accelerators, and we're going to discover something. And so it was like living on steroids, research on steroids a little bit, especially compared to the quiet, calm Dutch life in the 1980s. Yeah.
Yeah. And how about your colleagues? Were there a lot of people that were coming from abroad? Because it is quite a unique place in the world to come to CERN.
Yeah, that made it very attractive, and that's something you're used to nowadays here in Eindhoven. It's quite international as well. The other day, I was in a jury of Talking Science, and then there were 11 candidates, and it was so diverse, and I was really happy. Also, I was a mix of male, female, the international, and all sorts of people. But in those days, the atmosphere at Dutch universities, they were still very Dutch, and all the lectures were in Dutch. And then I came to CERN, and I worked in this extremely international environment. So in the experiment I worked, we were with about 100 to 120 physicists. So it was really a medium-sized experiment. And there was a group from Paris, from Saclay. There were groups from Freiburg, Heidelberg, but there were also groups from Warsaw, which there was still the Iron Curtain then. Yeah, because it fell in 1989. So they would drive in a Lada if they were lucky. And there were colleagues from Italy, and what the nice thing was that from Italy there were quite a few women, also from Warsaw. There was Emma Lundio, there was Cristiana Peroni from Italy. There were some women from Germany. There was a group from Oxford, I think, initially involved. Well, so that was mainly from Europe, but there were some from the United States as well. Yeah, that was really fantastic. And I am really happy that the world has changed now in such a way that we find these international communities in many places, because I think it's very enriching.
Indeed. Yeah. I have to say, I really appreciate that. It's Eindhoven University.
Yeah.
Also, recently, the fact that the lectures are switching to English, that also attracts much more people to come.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's so difficult. Like, if you would have to learn everything in Dutch, a bunch of people will already decide not to go for it.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate about it now in the Netherlands, because for some studies like philosophy, or if you study Dutch literature, it is helpful perhaps to have lectures in Dutch, because there you really need the refinement of a language, and in your mother tongue, not everyone, but you're more apt to express yourself, and you can better play with the words than you do in a language that's not your mother tongue. But I think especially at the University of Technology, and especially in a field where there's so much international collaboration, it is wiser to my mind, but that's personal opinion, to have the lectures in English.
Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah, the languages and they bring different nuances. But if we're talking about physics and mathematics, there are, let's say, universal laws that if I say something coming from Serbia, if I say F equals M times A, then you know what it means. If somebody in China looks at it, they know what it means. So there is more this universal language that we can all relate to.
Yeah.
So then, then the language does not play that big of a role as in the other sciences.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a bit more about your journey after the PhD.
Yeah, so after the PhD, I was a postdoc for a while, and I was a bit indecisive about continuing in research or doing something else. So, in a sense, I really loved doing research. I enjoyed working on experiments. As a postdoc, I was stationed in Amsterdam, but I had to travel to CERN regularly. But what I struggled with was, my position as one of the very few women, especially in the Netherlands. Once at CERN, it was slightly better, but in the Netherlands, the Netherlands is really old-fashioned in this respect, and it certainly was old-fashioned in this respect in the 80s and 90s. And the other thing was that I had two young daughters, which in the Netherlands was really seen as a handicap at the time, and literally called so at some point when I applied for a new postdoc position. And I found that so difficult and disappointing also the way that one looks at. Okay, nowadays perhaps you could also better plan your career. So it was perhaps not too wise to have, although I'm really happy with my daughters and I don't regret anything, but career-wise it was perhaps not the best decision to already have a daughter during my PhD and shortly thereafter. But I was really, it really had some backlash on my career. So I decided to do something else that you could better combine with raising two young children, and that was writing. But the positive aspect to that was that I really liked writing also, and it gives you a lot of independence. So although I do like to collaborate, and I'm happy again to be in Eindhoven where you can collaborate with other people because that's fantastic, I think. It can also, like at CERN, when you think about the large experiments at the LHC, the collider where the Higgs particle was discovered, these experiments from building to designing to discovery, that took more than 30 years, and there's a lot of meetings and management involved, and you work on a tiny little bit. Whereas as a science journalist, you think, oh, I would love to write about this new topic, and you can go ahead. So that's very nice about science journalism, for example. So in that sense, it was a positive choice. Also, gave me freedom to explore everything I was interested in, almost.
It's interesting that you say that you point out it took 30 years to build these huge setups and experiments. How was it to work there only, let's say, a fraction of time during those 30 years?
Yeah, I was not involved in the large in the experiments like Atlas and CMS that did the experiments at the Large Hadron Collider. So the experiment where I did my PhD work was called the New Muon collaboration, NA37. And it was a fixed target experiment. So we had large 3-meter long targets filled with either hydrogen or deuterium. So hydrogen in front, deuterium thereafter. And then we changed it, deuterium in front, hydrogen thereafter. And we would use muons, heavy brothers of electrons, to collide on this hydrogen and deuterium nuclei. But it was a small experiment, like 120 people. And it meant that I still got to participate in all the tasks. So when I arrived, there was one other PhD student, Maarten de Jong. He's now professor in Leiden. And so Maarten and I, and then there were two postdocs. They were from Belgium and Poland. But working for NICAF, we were responsible for the trigger system. So the system that decides, okay, this is an interesting event, we are going to record that. And at that time, it was still recorded on magnetic tape, quite old-fashioned. And Maarten and I, we had to calibrate the trigger system. So we used a cesium source, radioactive source, to go inside, and then you had scintillators, scintillating strips and planes filled with strips in horizontal and vertical direction throughout the detector. And we calibrated each of these strips, and then because all the signals had to arrive at the same time, so we had to add cable length 1 nanosecond or cable length 2 nanoseconds to make sure that the signals from all the strips would arrive at the same time. So there was a whole summer, and my hands were, because you had to unplug and plug these cables, they were like male hands. But that was really the detector part. But then I also did a lot of work in data analysis. So I went over all the code from a previous version of the experiment, and I expanded it, and I found some bugs in it. That was all Fortran 77. And then with the new code, we could analyze the data, and we could really have publications with interesting novel results. So I was really lucky in a sense. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was asked. I was only 22. Would you like to go there? And I came to an experiment, and I really got to know all aspects of research. So in that sense, it's really stupid that I dropped out in a way, but it was wonderful, really. Yeah.
Mm. And you mentioned it's one of the smaller experiments,
Yeah.
120 people.
Yeah.
Today, that is quite huge. Not everybody gets a chance to collaborate with the 120 people
Yeah.
working on the
Yeah.
same experiment. So how was
Yeah.
that?
That collaboration, to work together, you mean? Yeah, that was really nice. That was, of course, also at CERN, there were some men that were really not so happy or not so, not so much inclined to collaborate with women, or perhaps a bit condescending towards women. That still in those days, that was, I think, more often than nowadays, really. The nice thing was that there were also that I saw women from Warsaw, from, as I said, from Italy, and so that was inspiring. Yeah, I got to learn so much, also from all these different perspectives on physics. People in Italy that have been trained in Italy. I think I don't know how it is today, but in those days they had a more philosophical stance, sometimes towards physics. Of course, when people had studied in Germany, they were very rigorous. Also, I think also in Poland, the training had been really substantial, more substantial, I would say, than in the Netherlands even. Yeah, it was it it was really enriching, as I said before. Yeah.
Hmm. Let's touch a bit on this topic of women in STEM
Mm-hmm.
sciences. How has the landscape changed? Because you still stayed in science in different sides of it.
Yeah.
How did the landscape change since you were studying to nowadays?
Yeah, it changed enormously. I think in the Netherlands it has a very particular history, I think, due to the particular laws in the Netherlands. But it is very particular when you think about women in the sciences. Still nowadays, there are fewer women in working in the sciences in the Netherlands compared to many other countries. But it is way better than it was in the 80s. So in the 80s, there was a large governmental campaign with slogans like in Dutch, een slimme meid is op haar toekomst voorbereid, which means a clever girl prepares for a future, or kies exact. So encouraging girls to opt for studies in the natural sciences. At the same time, my high school teacher did discourage me initially from choosing physics. So there was a campaign on the one hand, but in society there were very few role models, very few women working in the sciences. If I now think back about my study years, it feels really strange. So I was the only girl in my year. There were 40 students. The year above me, none. The year below me, none. None of my teachers was a woman. I only had male teachers. I remember doing an oral examination. First question was, "What are you doing here?" It's, yeah, in retrospect, it's funny. You can only laugh about it. And nowadays okay, it's not 50-50. We don't know whether it will ever be 50-50, but in Eindhoven, I think we now have among the teachers at applied physics, 23% or so is female, which is a big jump compared to what I experienced. None of zero. So a lot has changed, and among the students you see more women, and I, I, it's still, there's not a level playing field, not at all, and I still think that female students nowadays need more encouragement, and of course, they have less role models. There are many things that still have to improve, but I think big steps have been taken, really. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to share this here, but there are a lot of campaigns to bring female professors, especially like in these, let's say, prominent roles where somebody can be on a higher position and be a role model and attract other women. So there are a lot of campaigns to bring them immediately to these positions where they are surrounded by not so many women. And on the other side, there's not so much support to, to persist and to carry all the burden that the society is going to put on you when they see you and say, you are hired because you're a woman.
Yeah.
Which is not true.
Yeah, but this is the downside of all these special dedicated programs. I think these programs are necessary to make this step, to go from almost zero to something you need to do to take a rigorous step. But the downside of this step is that people say, oh, you have only been chosen, or you only got this position because you are a woman. And the other thing is that you can rationally argue that we need that there should be a level playing field, and but it's still in the hearts and minds of people is this image, are these stereotypical images, are these very old ancient patterns of how to divide the tasks in life, and who has to do what, and these images and these very ancient ideas, they only change slowly because they are deeply ingrained in us, I think. So one of my favorite citations is by sociologist Abraham de Zwaan, who said, misogyny is something that we all inhale from the moment we are born, like the fine dust particles that you inhale. And you can't help it. Parents already raise boys and girls differently. There has been a lot of research that already children at the age of 6, they already have a feeling what professions are more male and what professions are more female, or that men are more clever than women. There's a very interesting study about brilliance. It has been published in 2016, I think, and it rates the idea that people have that some talents are innate. So some talents you are just born with. And so if it's a high score, people think that you really have to be born with the talent. And what topics do get a high score? Music composition, engineering, philosophy, physics, math. Where do you find the fewest women, where are minorities and women the least represented? Exactly in these fields. Because apparently we still think, and many women think that as well, that these talents belong to men more than they do to women. And so even if you make the laws equal, even if you promote women, if you do not help women to overcome those insecurities, and if you don't push men to reflect upon the stereotypical thinking that may leak through or may affect how they behave, then the women that you appoint will still have to struggle unavoidably.
Yeah, it's funny because it's also shown that looking at girls and boys in primary schools, especially in these exact sciences, that girls are actually much more dedicated, much more exact. So, this thing of who is more talented, and you say it's more, we value more these exact sciences and we find more men in them. But at a very young age, this is not true that, let's say, men are predisposed to go in this direction.
No, but it's what unconsciously children are being told and what they recognize, I think. And has also research has been done, for example, for the American Association for Engineers, and then asking really talented high school students that were in a special like honors class what do you need to become a good engineer? So you need to be able to solve problems. You need to be good in exact sciences and so on and so forth. And the interesting thing was that the male and female students, they named the same properties that you need to become a good engineer. The difference was that a male student said, yeah, I have this property. And the female students, 80% of the male students, really 80% said, yeah, I have this property. I am good in solving problems. And it was the complete opposite for female students. 80% said, no, I'm below average in this respect. So there's a lot of insecurity, and I think that already comes from the lack of role models, how girls are unconsciously very often being raised, and so on, societal expectations. So what Abraham de Swaan said, this is what we all inhale every day. So that changes slowly.
Yeah, that's true. And I also find it difficult to draw conclusions, like we want to measure everything and say, yeah, it's exactly like this and that. Whereas the quote that you bring up, it's beautiful, saying it's the tiny particles that we might not be even able to measure.
Yeah.
But they have a tremendous influence over decades, over a long time. Yeah. Tell me, what did these different roles bring you? Being a scientist, being a science journalist, being a mother?
Yeah. So being a science journalist enriched my life in the sense that I had extremely nice colleagues at the newspaper desks where I worked. So it gave me a lot of friends, which is important in life. And it allowed me to interview and talk to really bright people and extraordinary people. That was very enriching as well, I would say. So it brought me a lot. And what I liked about science journalism is that you are independent. You can also be critical, which is slightly different in science communication. You are more geared towards communicating and explaining, perhaps, or maintaining a dialogue. But then people are always kind of stakeholders, whereas in science journalism, you can, as on your own, balance the arguments and build a nice article. So I really like it a lot. In the sciences, I'm happy to be back in Eindhoven because I really do enjoy the academic and research environment. So it brings me a little bit back to my years in CERN. So the international collaboration, but also the enthusiasm that you encounter and so it's a vibrating atmosphere very often, not always, of course, but very often where new discoveries are being made or where people are very enthusiastic about their work. And yeah, I think perhaps one of my defining traits is being curious or curiosity. So then it's always nice to work in an environment where you every day almost can hear something new and exciting in a sense about the world. And yeah, being a mother, that is very crucial to my life. My daughters are 30 or 33 already because they were born when I was still quite young. And so I have a granddaughter already, and it's wonderful. Yeah, so we are very close, and we are all curious. I think all three of us. So we have a lot to talk about always.
And it's beautiful that you can give them this example of what it means to go the path, let's say, less traveled. Yeah, there's this, it's an interesting fact, like now that I live in the Netherlands, I hear a lot of these stories, women still work part-time and it's expected of them to work part-time and it's normal. Whereas I grew up in a country where my mother and my friends' mothers, they were working full-time. So for me, it was very normal that both my mother and father, they're working. Both of them are parents. So I do see this difference, like the starting point is very different. So for me, it's very normal now, like obtaining a career. It's a very normal thing because I saw that example. My mother was doing that. But I can imagine that if you did not see this example at home, it might be very difficult to imagine and to go there and be the first one to encounter all the obstacles that maybe you don't know who to talk to when you encounter an obstacle.
Mm-hmm.
How was that for you to be the first one, let's say the first generation of women within, is it true within your family that you went for this higher education?
So I was the first one to go to university. So my my mother was a teacher until she married. Then she was fired because the part-time positions in the Netherlands, they come from a long tradition in which women were not allowed to work once married and had to take care of the children in the household. And my grandmothers, my one grandmother, she was taken from school at the age of 10. She was not even allowed to finish primary school. She had to work on a farm. And my other grandmother, she was allowed to go to secondary school, but her father died when she was 13, and her father had said that all his children should go to secondary school whenever possible, also the girls. But his wife was left without an income when he died. So they didn't have housing initially, and so she worked so my great grandmother, she worked to do the washings for the richer people. So I really do not come from a family with a lot of tradition in academia in that sense, although my father later studied and we had a lot of discussions at home. But more generally speaking, in the Netherlands, and what you said about the difference between Serbia and the Netherlands, that is must be very striking for you, I think, because in the Netherlands it's true that we have this all these part-time positions for women. And that is really the result from a very long historical trend, I would say, in which a lot of emphasis was always put on motherhood and on women, being expected to be mothers in the first place and housekeepers.
Mm-hmm. Can you share a bit more about this regulation? So you said your mother, she was fired.
Yeah, so what you see almost all over the world is that around in the 19th century, women started to go to university. I began to go to university, sometimes to special colleges like in the UK and the United States that were established halfway the 19th century. In Russia, you had higher courses for women. In Central Europe and Western Europe, universities started to open their doors to women at the end of the 19th century, and it was like that in the Netherlands also. The first female student was Aletta Jacobs. He wrote a letter to the Minister of Education and then was allowed to go 1 year to see whether it would work out well. And when it worked out well, she wrote a second letter and then she was allowed to finish her studies. And around the 1900, there was really a substantial fraction of the students became female students, and half of these female students opted for the natural sciences. So if you look at 1920 in physics, our field, 30% of the students were female students. So it was way better than in the 80s when I studied. And that is strange. It's strange that 60 years before I started to study, there was 1 in 3 students in physics was a woman. Whereas when I began to study in the 80s, I thought that I was a pioneer and that hardly any woman in the Netherlands had ever studied physics. And to my mind, this is very much due to a law that was established in 1924 and that forbade married women to work. So as soon as you married, you were fired. Now, this could not be. This was officially this was for women in governmental positions, or how you said it in the educational system. So
Public
everyone
sector.
was, yeah, in the public sector. Indeed, I was looking for the word public sector. But that meant, like in physics, many of the physics students would become teachers or would become researchers at university, but women would be fired as soon as they married from such positions. So you see that in the 1930s, only 5% of the students in physics were female. So that had had large repercussions, I would say. Also, because these policies were copied by private companies, so the in the end it was a societal thing. It was not limited to public professions or the public sector, but it was really you could find it in all sectors. And that law was only abolished in 1957, but even my mother was halfway the 1960s was still fired when she married, even though the law was abolished. People were still practicing this outdated law. And so women had the same status once they married. In the public eye, you were raised because you were a married woman and you were no longer a single woman. As a single woman, you would be called mejuffrouw, so the same name as you use for a young girl. At the same time, when you're married, you lost all your independence, so you were not allowed to open a bank account. You were not allowed to take money from a bank account. You were not allowed to buy a house or a car or anything large. So you were on the same footing as mentally handicapped or children, according to the law. So you hardly had any rights where you could vote. But you were completely dependent from your husband, and that was only abolished in the 1957. So that is really late. And also after the Second World War, a whole tax system was established that favored families. So you would pay less tax as a male with a wife and children. You would get extra money when you had children, support, extra support. So it was in all aspects a wise decision to marry, both for men and women, I would say, because you could say, well, if you were a single woman, you at least you would be allowed to open a bank account and have a house, buy a house, but the rest of society would think, oh, poor woman, she's not married. It was a double standard.
Yeah.
And I think that to a large extent explains why in the Netherlands we still see so few women working full time and so few women in physics, for example, because I had no role models in a sense, because my mother, she kept on working part time and stepping in schools, but she was fired when she married formally. And so I try to raise my daughters, to give my daughters a different example, but it takes generations to change these patterns, I would say.
Yeah. There is a very nice video where they make kind of a job interview and people come. So they describe the circumstances of work. They say you had to work a lot of extra hours, you had to work the weekends, you especially had to work on holidays, like even more than usual. Uh, you have no holiday, so you have no leave, and everybody. So first they're excited, like yes, I'm getting a job, and then afterwards, of course, the enthusiasm goes down. Like who in the world would accept this kind of job? And in
Yeah,
the end, they say, "Welcome to motherhood. This is what your mother did for you." And then
yeah,
everybody starts crying, realizing how much effort that is. But it's
yeah,
unbelievable, how much, I don't know, value or like monetary value we put on work, and how much we devalue, parenthood, motherhood.
yeah. And care in general, if you care for a family member that is ill, or I think the Dutch economy would completely collapse if women stopped caring, because women they support family members, they support their elders, they support or their parents, they support their children, they support neighbors. It is also expected in the Dutch system. It's expected from you that you offer support, that you care. If, for example, if you have to go to hospital, or if you are an elderly person, you will be in hospital. You will be very quickly sent home to recover at home, and you will not receive a lot of official care, because you are expected to organize care and your family is expected to organize care. If women would stop to care and to give all this support, the economy would entirely collapse. But yeah, it's not valued, as you say. And I think society as a whole is a bit out of balance, because I have always combined my job also with motherhood. And I think we should value support and care more, and also take the time for it. I don't think we are not born to work 80 hours per week. And you can't be creative when you work so much. It's just nonsense to my mind, but okay. We're all in this rat race, and
Yeah,
it would be nice if we could find a new equilibrium somehow, I think.
I fully agree. There's also what comes to mind is this old expression saying behind every successful man there is a woman, which
Yeah.
was true for, let's say, old age, because men were the one who were going for a career, and the successful man for sure could not have,
Yeah.
let's say, on
But you can
average,
also
two.
turn it around. Behind every successful woman, there is a strong man, and it's true in a sense. If you look in the historically, if you look at women that succeeded, the most famous example is Marie Curie, but she got an enormous, tremendous support from Pierre Curie, who refused to have his Nobel Prize if they would not include her, and who always supported her. If you look at the very first female professor in the natural sciences, Laura Bassi, she was appointed in 1732 in Bologna, which was quite exceptional. Before she married, she wrote a letter to a friend that she found herself a husband, and that she really thought he was a true guy, because he was as interested as she in the natural sciences, and he would support her in proceeding on that path. They would go along that path together. And I found it time and again, women also advising their daughters, make sure that you pick the right husband, one that will support you. So it's what Marie Curie said to her daughters. It's what Tatiana Afanasieva, who was one of the main figures in a double biography I wrote, also wrote to her daughters. You find it time and again. So you can also reverse the expression. Yeah, so men and women should support each other.
Agreed. So, what is the advice that you give to your daughters?
um, I don't know if I really put the advice so much into words, because I thought they should really make their own choices. They didn't study anything in the natural sciences. So my one daughter studied philosophy and did the Academy of Arts in The Hague. And my other daughter studied philosophy and law, and she's now doing her PhD in legal philosophy. And yeah, they they have to choose their own path, but I think they are doing extremely well. I'm very proud of them.
Wonderful. As a finish line, tell me something about your book, which has a very interesting title in Dutch. So, if you can explain a bit what is the meaning behind the word.
Yeah, so the title is Ongekend, and in Dutch that means unknown, or unbeknownst, because it's portraits of women that have been overlooked in the past. So women that throughout their lives struggle to create a career, that very often made big discoveries or contributed in important manners to all sorts of fields, but that also after their career ended, dropped out of the history books, so they were unknown and are still unknown to many people. But ongekend also means exceptional, and wow, ongekend, oh, wow, that's great. So it has this double meaning. So I wanted to highlight and portray women that really did exceptional work, and even more exceptional given all the hurdles they encountered, and to put them in the limelight again, or to give them a stage, also in the hope that they can serve as a role model, that perhaps in future, when new school books are being made, we will not only find male scientists in them, but we can also show the examples of famous, but unfortunately for a long time overlooked female scientists.
Is it possible to find the book in English?
No, it has not been translated, but and I did. But there are good alternatives in the English language about all sorts. Similar books, I would say. Mine is. I have a long introduction, which is really about from Émilie du Châtelet to the present days, and in which I compare a little bit of what we discussed before, how things developed in the 19th century, compare Russia to the United States and Central Europe and so on. So perhaps that would be interesting for a translation in the future. But first, my other book about Paul Ehrenfest and Tatjana Afanasьeva is going to be translated. So I think one by one, perhaps. I don't know.
Nice. I would be very curious to read it. I could try Dutch, but English would be better.
Yeah.
Is there something else that I forgot to ask and you would like to share?
No. It was really nice to talk to you. I hope I didn't talk too much, because you also have we could also have, made a nice comparison, perhaps.
I do like inviting people and sharing their story. So I'm here just as a medium facilitator to get bits and pieces of your story, because this is just a snapshot of your experience and your life and your research. So thank you very much for sharing all of that, for taking the time, and for being so open to talk about topics that might be also a bit controversial to some people.
Okay. Well, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me here. It was really nice to talk to you.
To you too, Margriet.
Thanks for listening to this podcast episode. If there was anything that you discovered or found remotely interesting, do share. I'm always curious to hear what is it that you resonated with. See you in the next episode.